Now, I shall talk about incitement, hate language, and conflict from the standpoint of my own perspective, which is that of an epidemiologist using the tools of epidemiology to describe, predict, and prevent. Now, we've heard a great deal today to authenticate the validity of this aphorism by Abraham Joshua Heschel. Auschwitz was built not with stones, but words. And we've heard a great deal about the various types of incitement and hate language. To me, the two are overlapping. Incitement and hate language refers to the things we say about people. Incitement refers to going out to do something about, to the targets, to the people we dehumanize and demonize. Now, why the use of epidemiologic models? I, in public health, have seen their spectacular results in applications in the control of communicable and non-communicable diseases, injury, crime, disasters, and the like. And there have been successes in other fields, notably marketing, about which I'll have a few words to say in a few minutes in both directions. And the question is whether these same epidemiologic models and tools can bring some structure and rigor to what we're trying to do to predict and to prevent. Now, epidemiology, I'll make a 30-second introduction to 30 years of work in the field. It examines the distribution and the determinants of diseases or conditions. It looks for what, who, what, when, which, what, who, what, when, which, and how. And it investigates cause-effect relationships, which is where the action is, especially using models of source, exposure, transmission, and risk. Now, these are not academic exercises. They're used to predict and prevent. And we've seen spectacular advances in things like cigarette smoking and lung cancer and 100 other applications. Now, having bragged about my wonderful field, I must also tell you about how horrible we are. And Gregory warned me before my talk. He said, look, Richter, when you're talking about epidemiology, you're going to be sliding down a slippery slope because public health metaphors have been used to promote genocide and horrible crimes against humanity. Eugenics, social Darwinism. The Nazis began their selective killing by gassing of the medically challenged in their own institutions, Germans, before they began gassing Jews. And they did so in the name of public health, racial purity, and protecting the master race. So public health without core values can be very, very, very dangerous. And furthermore, my medical colleagues were in the forefront of promoting eugenics, public health, and Nazism. Here's Pernkopf, the author of that notorious anatomy book based upon dissections of victims of concentration camp victims. And here are his students in the University of Vienna. Furthermore, and this is something I don't know whether you know, the very perpetrators, the very men who were leaders in racial extermination, leaders of concentration camps, were great pioneers in Nazi public health. Karl Astel, a concentration camp commander and a medical doctor, was the president of the Nazi anti-smoking campaign, which had spectacular results in World War II. And the Nazis' epidemiologic studies preceded those which were carried out in Western countries by something like a decade with good results. So public health and genocide go together very nicely. Now, which means we have to have an ethical context. And I return here to what the first speaker talked about this morning. We must start with core values, and our war against incitement must be grounded in core values of respect for life and human dignity, because incitement and terror are crimes which promote death and everything against respect for life and human dignity. And so having slid down this slippery slope, I'm now trying to climb back up it and proclaim the case for these core values. Now look at this last, I need my glasses here. Okay, I'll manage. Genocide and genocidal terror are the most extreme assault on life, and incitement to both, therefore, is itself an extreme, thanks, story of my life, an extreme assault on those very human rights. And that has to be the banner which we proclaim and our battles we go forth to recruit what I'd call the enlightened elites of all societies in the West in this existential battle for the minds and hearts of the world today. Now, let me now spend a few minutes on some case studies of the role of incitement and violence at the individual and group level, and then I'll take you through a 5-minute cook's tour through some epidemiologic models which may be useful, and then I'll try to come to the bottom line, implications for prediction, and prediction means prevention, because if something is predictable, it's preventable. Now, here's my bird's eye view. It includes some of the case studies which Gregory cited, lessons from history, and lessons from social psychology and genocide studies, as well as some perspectives from epidemiology. Young Turks, genocide of the Armenians, an eradication of dangerous microbes in the body politic, 1 to 1.2 million dead. Lenin and Stalin, the bourgeoisie are parasites, insects, leeches, bloodsuckers, and they have to be purged. This is my course in parasitology. Tens of millions killed in ethnic purges, purge, clean things. Hitler, Jews are parasites, plague, cancer, tumor, bacillus, bloodsucker, blood poisoner, lice, vermin, bedbugs, fleas, racial tuberculosis on German body that would be killed with the Jewish disease, 6 million. The Khmer Rouge, referred to their adversaries as microbes, parasites, worms, and cancers, 3 million dead. The Serbs, Dr. Karashik, a colleague of mine, a psychiatrist. The Bosniaks originate from a specific gene of the Ottoman army, 104,000 dead. What I'm showing you here is the relationship between the exposure to the incitement, the language, and the outcome, the body count. That's what we're all about in epidemiology, exposure, outcome. Kosovars, the Roma themselves, who themselves were incited against, turned on the Roma. They are Majupi, or lower than garbage, thousands killed. And of course, we heard the story of Rwanda, 800,000 dead in 3 months. Darfur Janjaweed, there were racial epithets used. We're now discovering that there was a great deal of incitement below the radar screen. And now, of course, we have jihadist incitement. Zionists are sons of monkeys and pigs. And I've given you some numbers here so far. Now, the timeline for the genocide in Rwanda. Why do I put this up? This is the kind of thing epidemiologists like to do. They love to make graphs. What's interesting to me is how much warning time was there between the first early warning signs of incitement and the beginning of the butchery. And it's of the order of months. Am I correct? Yeah. Okay. How much time does it take to take people who are actually living side by side to start, for one group to start butchering the other? And that's an interesting question, because everyone was born a baby, a normal human being, a kid. How much time does it take to make him into a killer? That's a very important question. What's the incubation period? What's the latent period? Now, generally, genocide scholars like to talk about periods of weeks to months to years. But in a recent seminar we had with a group of Nigerian bishops at Christ Church with Tamar Pelegi, her dad is the vicar there, a Nigerian bishop told us, when he told us about Islamist incitement in Nigeria, we asked him, how much time does it take for a preacher to incite his community to go out and start killing? And he said, in a flash of a second, in a minute, an instant. And that can only mean one thing. That means that his audience has already been primed by pre-existing messages. He's been programmed. They have already been primed to react to a trigger event which can send them over the edge. If that same preacher were preaching to this audience, most of us would call the police. So there you have an example of a pre-existing, chronic, long-standing, perhaps low-level, quote, exposure, followed by a trigger event which sends everybody over the tipping point. Now, here's some of the material that Gregory referred to. I'll skip over it. The timelines. Timelines are very important in looking at incitement. Because they tell you how much time you have, and they look at what's happening in trends. Now, Cooper-Wasser and Kobe presented their timelines today for incitement in the incitement at various levels in the Palestinian community. What's really interesting to me is that there have been concurrent surveys by pollsters in the Palestinian community tracking attitudes towards war, peace, love, hate, and so on and so forth in their own society. And what those separate studies show is that there's a certain association between ups and downs in incitement and ups and downs in knowledge and attitudes and behaviors in the Palestinian community. That's the kind of information that strongly suggests this powerful short-term cause-effect relationship. If you raise the incitement, you get more hate. You lower the incitement, you get less hate. That's very important information, and it should be exploited. Now, we've talked about Rwanda and the convictions. Now, in Kenya, something rather interesting happened there. In Kenya, both after the last election, there was violence, ethnic violence breaking out between both sides, two rival factions competing for control. When it got on top of things, began using text messages to counteract the text messages of the inciters to stop the violence. So here you have an intervention, which apparently had some degree of benefit. Now, Iran is an existential emergency. Why the world is dragging its feet on failure to indict the Iranian leadership for its incitement to genocide, human rights abuses, illegal pursuit of nuclear weaponry, and promotion of genocidal terror escapes me. And I think one demand that should come out of this conference is a renewed call for the very measures proposed by H-Con Res 21 in July 2007. Now, I don't have to repeat Ahmadinejad's messages to all of you. You all know it. And here you see, by the way, the language is identical to that seen in Mein Kampf. Microbiologic, parasitologic, oncological, epidemiologic, straight out of my field. Now, we have to understand a little bit about the history of the science of modern mass marketing of hate language and incitement. How many of you know about Edward Bernays? One person? Yeah. Two or three people. Edward Bernays was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. Am I correct, Joel? Yeah. And they used to spend summer vacations together. He was the father of modern mass marketing of cigarettes. And his great accomplishment was not only to increase the sale of cigarettes to the male population, but also to hook women into smoking. And he was a genius. He instituted the modern methods of modern mass propaganda. And here's what he wrote. Modern propaganda is a consistent, enduring effort to create or shape events to influence the relationships of the public to an enterprise, idea, or group. Now, his most diligent disciple was another PhD, Dr. Joseph Goebbels, who copied all of Bernays' methods and applied them to Nazi propaganda. Blatant, loud repetition, role modeling images. We talked about Israelis serving as propagators of anti-Semites. Here you have doctors promoting the sale of Viceroy cigarettes. Same idea. And here you have Goebbels taking the methods and applying them to Nazi propaganda to promote the virtues of the master race and to dehumanize the Jewish race. And there are many more examples. So there you have now. So there you have the most famous case study of the use of mass marketing techniques and mass propaganda to propagate hate language and incitement. Now, let's now, with these case studies behind us, how much time do I have?
How much do you want? 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
No more than 10, probably
10
less.
maximum.
10 maximum. Some epidemiologic models. Iceberg, exposure, input and output, common sources and viral propagation, viral and intergenerational spread, multiple sources, high-risk subgroups, incubation and latent periods, we've talked about already, and then a very complicated concept, the mean predicts the extreme. Now, this is the iceberg every epidemiologic student sees in his first lecture of epidemiology. Everyone knows that for every patient who dies of a disease, there are many others who sit in the hospital or are sick. And for all those who are sick, there are many others who are out there walking around who are the walking sick, and they go to their doctors, but they're not yet hospitalized, but they're on their way unless we intervene earlier. And then, furthermore, there are many of those who are asymptomatic, simply with high indicators of risk for disease. They may smoke, their cholesterol may be up a little bit, but their EKGs are fine. They seem to be able to exercise, but they are at higher risk than everyone else. And then there are those who are perfectly well. Now, let's look at the ecology of terror. We've looked at the ecology of disease, now look at the ecology of terror and violence. For every terrorist, there are many others who are collaborators, planners, bystanders, and then there are funders, propagandists, and then there are enthusiastic bystanders, but they're too young to participate, and then there are vague sympathizers, and then there are those who are indifferent, and then there are those who are not at all not interested or resistant. By the way, extremely important concept, which I'll come to, the concept of positive deviance. In every group, there seem to be 10% who say, no, I'm not going to do the horrible things you want me to do. All the studies of the studies by Christopher Browning show that 10% of Regiment 101 it was? Christopher Browning's book. Ordinary men, ordinary people, ordinary men. 10% of those who were told to go out and kill said, no, it's not my thing, I'm not going to do it. And this seems to be the rough percentage in all groups. And one of the big challenges for us is to find out who those examples are, and instead of having the bad drag all the rest, have the good drag all the rest in the other direction. This is one of the big challenges. Who are those people? For example, I would like to know, among those who were just released from the Israeli prison, 60% refused to sign a statement condemning terror. 40% did sign. I would like to know the difference between those two. What characterizes those differences? Now, we've discussed this. Now, another concept, which is very basic to our field, is that we have exposure and effects, and then we have an outcome. Now, take, for example, all of those who drive. Among those, there are many speeders, but among only a very tiny number of those will be those who are involved in crashes. Likewise, with violence. For every person committing an act of violence, an actor or perpetrator, there'll be many others who are at risk. And the people who are at risk are those, that's the level at which we have to intervene. Now, I showed you the icebox, but this is a more interesting model. It's a bi-directional model. We can go in both directions. We can go from good to bad, but we can go from bad to good. And the question is, what do we have to do to go from bad to good? Now, propagation of messages. This is, 2 minutes, I'll be there. Okay, the Awalaki, he reached out to susceptibles. And he would reach out and he would hit many, many people. Nidal Hassan, the underwear bomber, Times Square bomber were among his disciples. Then this person-to-person spread to propagate a message as it was done in Kenya with text messaging. Now, the really big challenge is to deal with intergenerational spread, and this was developed with this morning. The horrible thing is, look, Nazi Germany from day 1 to day 0, when it ended, was 12 years. What we're now seeing is, with the propagation of intergenerational hatred in the Muslim world is that it's been going on for 60, and some people would say 600 years. So what's going on here? How do we break that cycle of intergenerational spread? I don't know. Clearly, we have to deal with a problem that begins with cradle to grave incitement from multiple exposures. Now, there's also the business of high-risk subgroups. Testosterone, the peak for testosterone, the peak for involvement in crime, the peak for involvement in fatal road crashes. Young males are the high-risk group. And in terror, we've also seen the same thing. Young males are the group that are greatest risk for all the reasons that young males are great risk for everything. And we've seen this in all the body counts in Intifada 1, Intifada 2, and also in Operation Cast Lead. Now, Incubation and latent periods I've already discussed. How much time does it take to turn a group of individuals into killers? Not very, very long. And I've already showed you this. No. Pardon? Yeah. Okay, I'm going fast. I'm speeding. Now, the mean determines the extreme, a very important concept. And this, to me, is perhaps the most important concept. And let me make it simple. Let's take the frequency distribution of everyone's blood pressure, and you'll get a frequency distribution which is normally distributed. If you add a tiny amount of salt to everyone's diet in the food supply, there'll be a shift to the right of everyone's blood pressure. In other words, everyone's blood pressure goes up a bit. So if you can shift the frequency distribution to the left by reducing the salt intake for everyone, and this step will be much more effective than just simply zeroing in on the so-called high-risk subgroup at the right tail end of the curve. In other words, there are small increases in risk applied to large numbers of people produce more cases than large increases in risk applied to small numbers of people. That's a complicated concept. And that concept needs to be applied to the, in using what we call a population-wide approach to the prevention of incitement. You just can't go in at the high-risk subgroups. You have to tackle the entire population from A to Z, just the way you have to tackle the prevention of hypertension by reducing the salt in everyone's diet. And so, it's critical to reduce population-wide endemic exposure to incitement. That's the lesson of Jeffrey Rose, the epidemiologist who coined this idea. It also means that unless you do that, all the point sources of incitement will not, dealing with them alone will have some effect, but will not have the systematic effect of a population-wide approach. Now, I'm almost done. Now, the other thing is the contextualization of incitement. We looked at the correlation between executions in Iran.
Richter, I must stop.
Okay,
We
go.
have two more speakers.
Okay, fine, I'm finished then. I'll finish and that's it. I simply will say that if incitement kills, we're going to have to kill incitement. Here's the index. And then one last point, foreign aid and Palestinian violence. They correlate. More foreign aid, more violence. So, and then here's my idea for how to, a grid for surveillance and modeling and epidemiologic metrics for looking at every country in terms of every source for the kind of incitement. That's the kind of epidemiologic surveillance we're going to need if we're going to have a population-wide approach to the prediction and prevention of incitement. And here's a punchline. Wars are not fought for territory, but words. Man's deadliest weapon is language. He's as susceptible to being hypnotized by slogans as he is to infectious diseases. And where there's an epidemic, the group mind takes over. Arthur Kessler, who knew a few things. Okay, this is a visit to my father's hometown in Poland, where there was a reconciliation between we Israelis and the members of the village. I'm sure that in World War II, there was anti-Semitism in that village.